Picture this: a lone cowboy rides into a dusty frontier town, his weathered face telling stories of countless trails and endless skies. But today, something's different. Today, 3 Apache women wait for him in the shadows of the saloon, their eyes holding secrets that could either make him the richest man in the territory or put a bullet between his shoulders. 10 years ago, when death stalked the desert and hope seemed as scarce as water in August, the same cowboy made a choice that saved 3 lives. He never expected payment. He never asked for gratitude. He simply did what his conscience demanded, then rode away into the sunset like so many heroes before him. But the Apache people have long memories, and debts of honor run deeper than any canyon in their sacred lands. Now, with silver mines and cattle barons carving up the West, these 3 women have come to collect on a debt he never knew existed. What they offer him will challenge everything he believes about loyalty, family, and the price of doing what's right. This is the story of Thomas "Red" McKinnon, a man who discovered that sometimes saving lives doesn't end with the rescue. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of an adventure that will test every fiber of his being and force him to choose between the life he's always known and a destiny he never imagined. In a land where trust is earned with blood and honor is measured in actions, not words, Red is about to learn that the greatest gifts sometimes come wrapped in the most dangerous packages. The dust kicked up by Red McKinnon's horse painted lazy spirals in the late afternoon air as he guided his mare, Susanna, down the main street of Cedar Falls. After 3 weeks on the trail driving cattle from the Rockingham Ranch to the stockyards in Tucson, every muscle in his body ached for a hot meal, a cold beer, and a soft bed. The familiar sounds of frontier life surrounded him, the rhythmic hammering from the blacksmith's shop, children's laughter echoing from behind weathered buildings, and the gentle creak of wagon wheels rolling over packed earth. Red had been riding these trails for nearly 15 years, ever since he'd left his family's farm in Missouri at the tender age of 17. Now 32, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands that told the story of countless days under the merciless western sun, he'd earned his reputation as one of the most reliable trail hands in the territory. Ranch owners knew that when they hired Red McKinnon, their cattle would reach their destination, and he'd account for every head. As he approached the Silver Dollar Saloon, Red's sharp green eyes caught something unusual. 3 Apache women sat on the wooden steps of the general store across the street, their colorful woven blankets draped over simple cotton dresses. What struck him as odd wasn't their presence. Apache people often came to town to trade, but the way they seemed to be watching him specifically. Their dark eyes followed his movement with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Red had learned long ago to trust his instincts. In a land where danger could strike faster than a rattlesnake, paying attention to details often meant the difference between living to see another sunset and becoming buzzard food. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements casual while his hand rested near his Colt .45. Not that he expected trouble from the women, but their focused attention suggested something was about to happen, and Red had survived this long by being prepared for anything. The oldest of the 3 women rose gracefully from the steps. She appeared to be in her 40s, with streaks of silver threading through her long black hair. Her face bore the dignified lines of someone who had lived through both joy and hardship. As she approached, Red noticed she moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to respect. The 2 younger women, perhaps in their 20s, remained seated but watched intently. Thomas McKinnon, the woman said in accented but clear English. Her voice carried an authority that commanded attention. "You are the one they call Red." It wasn't a question. Red touched the brim of his worn hat politely, his curiosity growing stronger with each passing second. "Yes, ma'am. Though I don't believe I've had the pleasure of making your acquaintance." A slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I am Ayana of the Chiricahua Apache. These are my daughters, Kachina and Nailnish." She gestured toward the younger women, who nodded respectfully. "We have been searching for you for many seasons." Red's mind raced. Searching for him? He'd had dealings with various Apache groups over the years, mostly peaceful trading encounters at remote water sources or along mountain passes. He'd always treated the native peoples with respect, understanding that this was their ancestral land long before white settlers arrived. But he couldn't recall any specific interaction that would prompt someone to search for him across the vast expanse of the Southwest. "I'm not sure I understand, ma'am. Have we met before?" Ayana studied his face carefully, as if searching for something in his features. 10 summers ago, in the Dragoon Mountains. You found 3 Apache women dying of thirst near Skeleton Canyon. Do you remember? The memory hit Red like a physical blow. 10 years ago, he'd been riding through the Dragoons on his way to deliver a message between 2 remote ranches when he discovered 3 women collapsed near a dried-up spring. They'd been traveling for days without adequate water, fleeing some kind of trouble. Red had shared his water, helped them find a working spring, and given them enough supplies to reach their destination safely. He'd never learned their names or their story, they'd spoken little English, and his Apache was practically non-existent. I remember, Red said slowly. But that was just common decency. Anyone would have done the same. No, Ayana said firmly. Not anyone. You could have ridden past. Many would have. You could have taken advantage of our weakness. Some would have. Instead, you helped us reach safety and asked for nothing in return. She paused, her eyes holding his steady gaze. Those 3 women were my daughters and myself. Red felt his world shift slightly. The 3 desperate women he'd helped a decade ago stood before him now, healthy and strong. The younger women had been barely more than teenagers then, and he hadn't recognized them. The intervening years had changed them all, filling out their faces and adding confidence to their bearing. We owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with simple words, Ayana continued. Among my people, such a debt creates bonds that last generations. We have come to honor that debt. There's no debt, Red protested. I was glad to help. Seeing you all safe and, well, is payment enough for me. Kachina, the taller of the 2 daughters, stood and approached. Like her mother, she moved with natural grace. Mr. McKinnon, you saved our lives. In our culture, this creates a sacred obligation. We cannot simply pretend it never happened. Red found himself in unfamiliar territory. He understood the Apache people valued honor and reciprocity, but he'd never imagined his simple act of kindness would create such lasting consequences. What exactly are you proposing? Ayana reached into a leather pouch at her side and withdrew a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. She carefully unfolded the wrapping to reveal a piece of turquoise unlike anything Red had ever seen. The stone was the size of a silver dollar, its blue-green surface shot through with veins of what appeared to be pure silver. Even in the fading daylight, it seemed to glow with an inner fire. This stone came from a sacred place in our mountains, Ayana explained. It marks the entrance to something that could change your life forever. But, first, you must understand the full weight of what we offer. Red stared at the turquoise, mesmerized by its beauty. He'd seen plenty of turquoise in his years in the Southwest, but nothing like this. The stone seemed to pulse with life, as if it contained some kind of natural energy. It's beautiful, but I can't accept something so valuable. What you're showing me looks like it belongs in a museum or a chief's ceremonial regalia. It belongs with someone who understands honor, Nailnish spoke for the first time. Her voice was softer than her mother's but carried equal conviction. Someone who acts without thought of reward. The conversation was drawing attention from other people on the street. Red noticed a few cowboys from local ranches watching from the saloon porch, their expressions curious but cautious. Relations between white settlers and Apache had been tense for years, punctuated by periods of warfare and uneasy truces. Most folks in Cedar Falls had never seen Apache women speak so openly with a white cowboy. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, Red suggested. The hotel has a restaurant where we could sit and talk properly. Ayana nodded approvingly. You think of others' comfort. This is good. She rewrapped the turquoise carefully. But what we must show you cannot be seen in town. It lies in the mountains, 3 days' ride from here. Red felt excitement and caution warring in his chest. 3 days into Apache territory, even with Apache guides, represented significant risk. But the mystery surrounding these women and their offer intrigued him more than anything had in years. His life had settled into comfortable routines, trail drives, cattle work, occasional odd jobs that paid well enough to keep him fed and clothed. This conversation promised adventure and purpose he hadn't realized he was missing. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Come with us," Ayana said simply. "See what we wish to show you. Then, decide if you will accept our gift or walk away. We will respect either choice, but you must see the full scope of what we offer before you can make a wise decision." Red considered his options. He had no pressing obligations for the next month. The cattle drive was complete, and he'd collected his pay. His savings were enough to cover several months of expenses, so he didn't need to immediately seek new work. The practical part of his mind warned him about the risks, but the part that had led him to help 3 desperate women years ago whispered that some opportunities came only once in a lifetime. "If I agree to come with you, what guarantees do I have of safe passage? Not that I don't trust you personally, but your people and mine haven't always been on the best of terms." Kachina reached into her own pouch and withdrew a small carved wooden pendant hung on a leather cord. The carving depicted an eagle in flight, its wings spread wide. "This is a safe passage token from our band. Any Apache who sees this will know you travel under our protection. You will be as safe as if you were our blood brother." Red examined the pendant. The carving was exquisite, showing skill that spoke of generations of tradition. The wood had been polished smooth and darkened with age and careful handling. "And after I see whatever it is you want to show me? What then?" "Then, you decide," Ayana replied. "Accept our gift and the responsibilities that come with it, or return to your life with our eternal gratitude and no hard feelings. The choice will be entirely yours." The sun was beginning to set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Red had always loved this time of day in the desert. The heat broke, the light turned magical, and the world seemed full of infinite possibilities. Standing here with these 3 women, he felt that sense of possibility more strongly than he had in years. "When would we leave?" "Tomorrow at first light," Ayana answered. "Bring supplies for a week in the mountains. We will provide everything else you need." Red nodded slowly. "I'll need to settle my affairs here in town, make sure my horse is ready for mountain travel, and stock up on supplies." He paused, meeting each woman's eyes in turn. "I hope I won't regret this decision." Ayana's smile was warm and genuine. "Thomas McKinnon, I believe this decision will prove to be the most important of your life. Sleep well tonight. Tomorrow, your true adventure begins." As the 3 women walked away, their colorful blankets swaying with their graceful movements, Red stood in the gathering dusk and wondered what he'd just agreed to. The logical part of his mind listed all the ways this could go wrong, but something deeper than logic had already made the decision. 10 years ago, he'd followed his conscience and helped 3 strangers. Tomorrow, he'd discover where that simple act of kindness had been leading him all along. The Silver Dollar Saloon beckoned with warm lamplight and the promise of familiar comforts, but Red found himself too restless for drinking. Instead, he led Susanna to the livery stable, arranged for her care, and spent the evening checking his gear and planning for whatever lay ahead in the Apache Mountains. One thing was certain: his quiet life as a trail hand was about to change dramatically. As he finally settled into his hotel room bed that night, Red fingered the eagle pendant and stared out his window at the star-filled sky. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions he didn't even know he'd been asking. For the first time in years, he fell asleep eager to see what the next day would bring. Dawn broke crisp and clear over Cedar Falls, painting the distant mountains in shades of rose and gold. Red had been awake since before sunrise, his internal clock honed by years of early morning cattle drives. He'd spent the extra time double-checking his supplies and ensuring Susanna was properly prepared for mountain travel. His saddlebags contained jerky, hardtack, coffee, ammunition, and basic medical supplies. His bedroll was strapped securely behind his saddle, and his water containers were full. The 3 Apache women were waiting for him at the edge of town, seated on 3 sturdy ponies that looked well-suited for mountain terrain. Each animal was compact but muscular, with the kind of sure-footed build that could navigate rocky slopes and narrow trails. The women had traded their town clothes for traditional traveling attire: leather leggings, sturdy moccasins, and colorful woven shirts that would provide protection from thorns and rough terrain. You are punctual, Ayana observed approvingly as Red approached on Susanna. This speaks well of your character. My father always said that showing up on time shows respect for other people's efforts, Red replied. Though I'll admit, I didn't sleep as much as I might have liked. Curiosity has a way of keeping a man's mind active. Kachina laughed, a sound like silver bells in the morning air. Mother says curiosity is what separates the wise from the foolish. The foolish fear the unknown, but the wise seek to understand it. They set out toward the northeast, following a well-worn trail that wound gradually upward into the foothills. Red had ridden through this country before, but always as a passerby focused on reaching his destination quickly. Now, traveling at a more leisurely pace with knowledgeable guides, he began to notice details he'd previously missed. Ayana pointed out various plants and rock formations, explaining their significance in Apache tradition. A particular type of cactus flower indicated the best season for gathering certain roots. Specific rock patterns revealed ancient water sources that could mean the difference between life and death in dry seasons. Red found himself genuinely fascinated by the depth of knowledge these people possessed about their homeland. Your people have been here for a long time, Red observed as they paused to rest the horses near a small spring. Longer than anyone remembers, Nailnish replied. Our grandmothers knew these mountains. Every stream, every canyon, every hidden valley holds stories passed down through countless generations. Red had grown up hearing stories about savage Indians who scalped settlers and burned homesteads. But, riding with these three women, he saw intelligence, dignity, and a profound connection to the land that most white settlers never achieved. The disconnect between the stories he'd heard and the reality he was experiencing made him question much of what he'd been told about Apache people. What was happening that day 10 years ago? Red asked as they resumed riding. If you don't mind me asking. You were in pretty desperate shape when I found you. Ayana's expression darkened slightly. There had been trouble between our band and the soldiers at Fort Buchanan. Some young warriors had raided a supply wagon, claiming they were only taking back what had been stolen from our people. The soldiers retaliated by attacking our camp at dawn. Red had heard about such conflicts but never from the Apache perspective. Were you hurt in the attack? We escaped, but barely, Kachina continued the story. Many of our people were killed or captured. We fled into the mountains with nothing but the clothes on our backs. We wandered for days, trying to reach a safe place where we could reunite with other survivors. That's when you found us, Nailnish added. We had been without water for 2 days. Another few hours, and we would have died. The weight of what Red had prevented began to sink in. He'd saved 3 lives, but the ripple effects extended far beyond those 3 individuals. Ayana clearly held an important position in her community. Her daughters would have had children of their own by now, families that existed because of his simple act of kindness. I'm glad I was there, Red said simply. But I still don't understand why this creates such a lasting obligation. Helping people in trouble is just basic human decency. Among your people, perhaps, Ayana replied. But, among mine, life debts are sacred bonds that connect souls across time. When someone saves your life, they become responsible for what you do with that life. Similarly, we become responsible for ensuring their kindness is properly rewarded. The trail began climbing more steeply as they entered the true mountains. Pine trees replaced desert scrub, and the air grew noticeably cooler. Red could see why Apache people had chosen this terrain as strongholds during conflicts with the U.S. Army. The landscape offered countless hiding places, defensive positions, and escape routes that would be nearly impossible for large military formations to navigate. How much further to wherever we're going? Red asked. We will reach the first marker before sunset, Ayana replied cryptically. Tomorrow, we begin the real journey. Red was beginning to understand that his Apache companions thought in terms of stages and ceremonies rather than simple destinations. Everything seemed to have deeper meaning and significance than surface appearances suggested. This approach to life intrigued him, so different from the straightforward, practical mindset he'd developed during his years as a working cowboy. They made camp that evening in a sheltered grove of pine trees beside a clear mountain stream. Red had expected to use his own supplies, but the women produced an abundance of food from their packs: dried meat that had been seasoned with unfamiliar but delicious spices, a type of flatbread that filled his stomach with surprising efficiency, and a tea made from mountain herbs that seemed to wash away the day's fatigue. As darkness fell, Ayana built their fire with a skill that spoke of decades of wilderness experience. The flames danced cheerfully, casting shifting shadows among the pine trees while night sounds echoed from the surrounding forest. "Tell me about your life, Thomas McKinnon," Ayana requested as they sat around the fire. "What brought you to this territory? What keeps you moving from place to place like tumblewood?" Red stared into the flames, considering how to answer. His life story wasn't particularly dramatic, but these people seemed genuinely interested in understanding who he was as a person. "I grew up on a farm in Missouri," he began. "Good land, hard-working parents, 5 younger brothers and sisters. But farming never felt right to me. I loved the work, understood the land, but something inside me needed bigger horizons." "You needed to test yourself," Kachina observed. "To discover who you were beyond what others expected you to be." "Something like that," Red agreed. "When I was 17, a cattle drive came through our area looking for hands. The trail boss was willing to take on an inexperienced kid if he could prove he wouldn't quit at the first sign of hardship. I convinced my parents to let me try it for 1 season. But 1 season became many seasons," Nailnish guessed. 15 years and counting," Red confirmed. "I found something out here that I'd been missing back home. Freedom, I suppose. The ability to make my own choices and live with the consequences. Every day brings something different: new country to see, new problems to solve, new people to meet." Ayana nodded thoughtfully. "Among my people, young men traditionally went on vision quests to discover their true purpose. You have been on such a quest for many years, though you may not have recognized it as such." Red had never thought of his wandering life in spiritual terms, but Ayana's perspective made sense. He'd been searching for something, even if he couldn't clearly define what that something was. "What about family?" Kachina asked. "Do you not wish for a wife and children?" "I've thought about it," Red admitted. "But the life I've chosen doesn't leave much room for domestic responsibilities. I'm gone for months at a time, never know where the next job might take me. Wouldn't be fair to ask a woman to build a life around such uncertainty." "Perhaps you have not yet found the right woman," Nailnish suggested with a mischievous smile. "One who values adventure as much as security." Red chuckled. "Maybe so. Though I've learned not to plan too far ahead. Life has a way of changing direction when you least expect it." "Yes," Ayana agreed, her voice carrying layers of meaning. "Life does indeed change direction. Sometimes, what we think we want is not what we truly need. Tomorrow, you will begin to understand this truth." The conversation drifted to other topics: the history of the region, changes brought by increasing white settlement, the challenges facing Apache people and adapting to new realities. Red found himself gaining insights into a culture he'd previously known only through stories and assumptions. As the fire burned lower, the women began preparing for sleep with efficient, practiced movements. Red laid out his bedroll at a respectful distance, following their lead in arranging his gear for quick access if needed. "Thomas," Ayana said quietly as they settled down. "Tomorrow, you must be prepared to see things that challenge your understanding of the world. What we will show you has been hidden from white men since the first Spanish explorers entered this territory." "Are you saying I'm the first white man to see whatever it is you're taking me to?" "Not the first," Ayana replied carefully. "But perhaps the first who can be trusted with the responsibility such knowledge brings." Red lay in his bedroll staring up at stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The mountain air was clean and thin, carrying scents of pine resin and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called mournfully to its mate. He felt more alive and alert than he had in months, as if every sense was heightened by anticipation of what tomorrow would bring. Sleep came eventually, filled with dreams of turquoise stones that glowed like captured starlight and ancient voices speaking words he couldn't understand but somehow comprehended in his heart. When he woke before dawn, Red knew with absolute certainty that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. The second day of travel took them higher into the mountains, following trails that seemed to appear and disappear according to some logic Red couldn't decipher. Sometimes they rode along clear paths that could have accommodated a wagon. Other times, they picked their way carefully through boulder fields or along narrow ledges with stomach-churning drops to one side. Ayana led with the confidence of someone who could navigate these routes blindfolded. Kachina and Nailnish flanked Red, ready to offer guidance or assistance if needed. Their concern for his safety was touching, given that he was supposedly the one doing them a favor by making this journey. "How do you remember all these routes?" Red asked during one of their rest stops. "Some of these trails can't be used more than once or twice a year. We learn the mountains the way you learn to read," Kachina explained. "Starting with simple things, then, gradually building complexity until the whole system makes sense. Each rock, each tree, each turn has meaning and connects to everything else. It's like a giant puzzle," Nailnish added. "Once you understand the pattern, you can navigate anywhere in Apache country without getting lost." Red tried to imagine possessing such intimate knowledge of any landscape. Even the ranch country where he'd worked for years remained somewhat mysterious to him. These people lived in harmony with their environment in ways that white settlers, for all their technology and determination, had never achieved. Late in the afternoon, they reached what Ayana had called the first marker. It appeared to be nothing more than a pile of stones arranged in a rough circle, but Red noticed that the stones were all the same type of turquoise-veined rock he'd seen in Ayana's pendant. The arrangement sat at the junction of several barely visible trails, marking some kind of significant location. "What is this place?" Red asked. "A boundary," Ayana replied. "Beyond this point, you enter sacred territory. Only those with proper authority may pass." She dismounted and approached the stone circle with obvious reverence. After removing several small objects from her pack, feathers, carved bones, tiny cloth bundles, she arranged them carefully among the stones while speaking softly in Apache. Red couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clearly respectful, almost prayerful. Kachina and Nailnish joined their mother in the ceremony, each adding their own offerings to the arrangement. The ritual had the feeling of both greeting and permission-seeking, as if they were announcing themselves to invisible guardians and requesting safe passage. "What should I do?" Red asked quietly. "Simply show respect," Ayana replied. "This place is older than memory. Many generations of my people have passed this way, leaving part of their spirit to protect and guide those who come after." Red dismounted and stood silently while the women completed their ceremony. He could feel something in this place, a sense of presence that had nothing to do with visible surroundings. The very air seemed charged with significance, as if the stones themselves were alive and aware. When the ritual concluded, Ayana gathered her offerings and carefully replaced them in her pack. "Now we may continue," she announced. "But, remember, from this point forward, you walk in the footsteps of spirits. Show appropriate reverence." The trail beyond the marker led steadily upward through increasingly dramatic terrain. Red began to see why this area would be considered sacred by people who lived close to the natural world. The landscape was breathtakingly beautiful but also somehow otherworldly, as if ordinary rules didn't quite apply here. As the sun set behind towering peaks, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold, Red realized they were approaching their final destination. Tomorrow, he would learn what these three remarkable women had traveled so far to show him. Tonight, he would sleep on the threshold of mystery, dreaming of turquoise stones and ancient promises finally coming due. The third morning dawned with a crystalline clarity that seemed to make every detail of the mountain landscape stand out with supernatural sharpness. Red woke to find frost covering his bedroll, though the previous evening had felt merely cool. The altitude was affecting him more than he'd expected, making him slightly lightheaded and forcing him to breathe more deeply than usual. Ayana was already awake, sitting cross-legged beside the remains of their fire. She appeared to be meditating, her face turned toward the rising sun with an expression of profound serenity. Kachina and Nailnish were preparing a simple breakfast with movements so quiet they barely disturbed the mountain silence. "Good morning," Red said softly, not wanting to interrupt whatever spiritual practice Ayana was observing. "Good morning, Thomas McKinnon," she replied without opening her eyes. "Today, you will see what we have traveled so far to show you. Are you prepared?" Red considered the question seriously. How could anyone be truly prepared for something they couldn't imagine? I'm ready for whatever comes, he answered honestly. Ayana opened her eyes and studied his face carefully. Yes, I believe you are. Your spirit has the flexibility necessary for what lies ahead. They broke camp with practiced efficiency, but Red noticed the women spent extra time ensuring no trace of their presence remained. Every stick from their fire was scattered, every footprint carefully obscured. The level of care seemed excessive until Red realized they were preparing to enter an area where secrecy was paramount. From this point forward, Ayana explained as they mounted their horses, you must give me your word that you will never reveal the location of what we are about to show you. Not to any other white man, not to the military, not to anyone who might use this knowledge to harm my people. You have my word, Red replied without hesitation. Though I'm still not sure what could be so important. You will understand soon enough, Katjina said with a mysterious smile. But, once you see it, you will also understand why such secrecy is necessary. They rode for 2 more hours along trails that became increasingly difficult to follow. Sometimes Red could see no trail at all, yet his guides moved forward with unwavering confidence through terrain that looked identical in every direction. The skill required for such navigation impressed him more with each passing mile. Finally, they reached what appeared to be a solid wall of rock rising vertically for several hundred feet. Red could see no way forward, no trail around the obstacle, no obvious passage through the barrier. He was about to ask how they would proceed when Nailnish dismounted and approached what looked like just another section of stone wall. She pressed her hands against the rock in a specific pattern, and Red's eyes widened in amazement as a previously invisible opening became apparent. What he had taken for solid stone was actually a narrow passage cleverly concealed by the play of light and shadow. The entrance was just wide enough for a horse and rider to squeeze through single file. Natural camouflage, Katjina explained, seeing Red's expression. The rock formation creates an optical illusion that hides the passage from anyone who doesn't know exactly where to look. They led their horses through the narrow opening into a hidden valley that took Red's breath away. The space was roughly circular, perhaps a mile across, completely enclosed by towering rock walls that rose like cathedral spires toward the sky. A crystal-clear stream wound through the valley floor, fed by several small waterfalls cascading down the surrounding cliffs. But what truly amazed Red was the evidence of human habitation throughout the valley. Ancient stone structures dotted the landscape, not simple shelters, but sophisticated buildings that spoke of a highly developed civilization. Some were built directly into the cliff faces, their walls and roofs invisible from outside the valley. Others stood free in carefully chosen locations that took advantage of natural features for both beauty and defense. My God, Red breathed, turning in his saddle to take in the full scope of what lay before him. How long has this place been here? Longer than anyone remembers, Ayana replied. Our oldest stories speak of people who lived here before the Apache came to these mountains. We found it abandoned but preserved, as if its original inhabitants had simply vanished one day, expecting to return. Red could see gardens and terraced growing areas that showed signs of recent cultivation. Smoke rose from several of the buildings, indicating current occupation. This wasn't just an archaeological site, it was a living community hidden away from the outside world. Who lives here now? He asked. Apache families who chose to preserve the old ways rather than accept reservation life, Katjina explained. People who believe our culture and traditions are worth more than the safety offered by the white man's government. As they rode deeper into the valley, Red began to see residents going about their daily activities. Children played near the stream while their mothers tended gardens or worked on various crafts. Men were visible on the upper levels of the cliff dwellings, apparently engaged in maintenance or construction work. Everyone they passed greeted Ayana and her daughters with obvious respect and affection. This is incredible, Red said, still struggling to absorb the full significance of what he was seeing. But I still don't understand why you brought me here. What does this have to do with the debt you think you owe me? Ayana didn't answer immediately. Instead, she led them to the largest structure in the valley, a multi-story building constructed both into and onto a natural shelf in the cliff face. The architecture was unlike anything Red had ever seen, flowing lines that worked with the natural rock formations rather than imposing artificial geometry on the landscape. an elderly man emerged from the building as they approached. His hair was white as fresh snow, and his weathered face bore the marks of great age and wisdom. Despite his apparent years, he moved with the easy grace of someone in excellent health. Intricate tattoos covered his arms and chest, and he wore the kind of elaborate jewelry Red associated with important tribal leaders. "Grandfather," Ayana said respectfully, dismounting to greet the man properly. "I have brought the one we discussed." The elderly man's dark eyes fixed on Red with an intensity that seemed to look straight through to his soul. "So, this is Thomas McKinnon, the man who saved my granddaughters." Red dismounted and removed his hat respectfully. "Sir. Though I hope they've explained that I don't consider their debt unpaid." "Of course not," the old man replied with a slight smile. "Honor cannot be bought or sold, only recognized and returned. I am Cochise, named for the great war chief, though I am his grandson, not the man himself. I lead this community." Red had heard stories of the great Cochise, the Apache leader who had fought brilliantly against the U.S. Army for decades before negotiating an honorable peace. To meet his grandson in such circumstances felt like stepping into living history. "It's an honor to meet you, sir. This place is remarkable. I had no idea anything like it existed." "Few do," Cochise replied. "And that secrecy has allowed us to preserve what would otherwise have been lost forever. But secrecy alone cannot protect us indefinitely. We need allies who understand the value of what we preserve here." Red was beginning to sense the direction this conversation was heading. "What kind of allies?" "Men like yourself," Ayana answered. "Men who act from conscience rather than profit. Men who can move freely in the white world but choose to honor obligations to Apache people." Cochise gestured toward the buildings around them. "What you see here represents the accumulated knowledge and skills of many generations. We have preserved traditional ways of living with the land that your people have forgotten. We maintain spiritual practices that connect us to forces your churches no longer recognize. We possess knowledge that could benefit both our peoples if shared wisely. But sharing requires trust," Kachina added. "And trust must be earned through demonstrated character." Red was starting to understand the scope of what these people were considering. They weren't just offering him a glimpse into their hidden world, they were evaluating him as a potential bridge between two cultures that had been at war for decades. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "First, see everything we wish to show you," Cochise replied. "Understand the full value of what we preserve here. Then, if you choose to accept our gift, help us protect it while sharing appropriate knowledge with those in your world who can benefit from it." "What kind of knowledge?" Nailnish stepped forward, excitement evident in her voice. "Healing techniques that your doctors have never imagined. Agricultural methods that can make desert land bloom. Metalworking skills that produce tools superior to anything your factories create. And other things," Ayana added mysteriously. "Things that might change your entire understanding of what is possible in this world." Red felt his heart racing with excitement and apprehension. The implications of what they were describing were staggering. If this hidden community truly possessed superior knowledge in multiple fields, sharing it carefully could benefit countless people. But the risks were equally enormous for both him and the Apache families who called this valley home. "How do I know I'm capable of handling such responsibility?" "Because 10 years ago, you proved you act from conscience rather than self-interest," Cochise replied simply. "Because you have spent these days with my granddaughters without attempting to take advantage of their trust. Because you ask about responsibility rather than profit." The old leader paused, studying Red's face with those penetrating dark eyes. "But, most importantly, because you are questioning your own worthiness rather than assuming you deserve whatever we offer. This humility suggests you might be capable of wisdom." Red looked around the hidden valley, seeing it with new eyes now that he understood its significance. This wasn't just a refuge, it was a living library containing knowledge that could transform the relationship between Apache and white cultures. The responsibility being offered to him was both thrilling and terrifying. "If I agree to this, what happens to my current life? I can't just disappear from the white world without people asking questions. You would not disappear, Ayanna assured him. You would continue your work as a cowboy and trail hand, but with additional purpose and resources. This valley would become a sanctuary you could return to when needed, and we would provide you with knowledge and tools that would make you more effective in your chosen profession. Plus, Kachina added with a grin, you would have a family here. People who understand your true value and support your efforts. The word family hit Red harder than he'd expected. For 15 years, he'd been essentially alone in the world, moving from job to job without forming lasting connections. The idea of belonging somewhere, of having people who cared about his welfare and shared his values, appealed to him more than any material reward they might offer. Can I see more of this place before I make my decision? I want to understand fully what I'd be committing to. Of course, Cochise replied. You will stay with us for several days, learning about our ways and examining our capabilities. Only when you have complete knowledge will you be asked to choose. As they led Red deeper into the valley community, he noticed details that reinforced his growing amazement. The terraced gardens produced crops he didn't recognize, arranged in patterns that seemed to maximize both yield and beauty. Workshop areas showed evidence of metalworking, weaving, and crafts that surpassed anything he'd seen in white settlements. Children ran freely through the community, their laughter echoing off the cliff walls, while adults pursued activities that seemed to blend practical necessity with artistic expression. How many people live here? Red asked. About 200, Cochise replied. Enough to maintain our traditions and defend ourselves if necessary, but not so many that we overwhelm the valley's natural resources. And no one in the outside world knows about this place? A few, Ayanna admitted. Traders who have proven trustworthy over many years. A handful of white men who have married into Apache families and chosen to live our way. But knowledge of this valley's location dies with each person who possesses it, unless they specifically pass it on to someone worthy. Red realized he was being offered membership in an extremely exclusive group. The honor was almost overwhelming, but so was the weight of secrecy such membership would require. Could he live with keeping such momentous knowledge hidden from the rest of his world? What if I see things here that I believe would help other white people, things that could prevent conflicts or save lives? Would I be forbidden from sharing that knowledge? That is exactly the kind of wisdom we hope you would provide, Cochise said approvingly. You would help us determine what knowledge can be safely shared and how to share it without revealing this valley's existence. We seek a trusted intermediary, not someone bound to absolute silence. As the sun reached its zenith above the hidden valley, Red found himself standing at the crossroads of his life. Behind him lay 15 years of wandering, searching for something he couldn't name. Ahead lay the possibility of purpose and belonging beyond anything he'd ever imagined. But first, he needed to learn exactly what these remarkable people were offering him. The next few days would determine not just his own future, but potentially the future relationship between two peoples who had been shaped by conflict for far too long. Red McKinnon, the trail hand from Missouri, was about to discover whether he had the courage and wisdom to become something much more significant. As Cochise led him toward the first of many workshops and learning areas, Red felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a familiar saddle blanket. For the first time in his adult life, he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The realization both thrilled and terrified him, but there was no turning back now. His adventure was just beginning. The next 3 days in the hidden valley opened Red's eyes to possibilities he had never imagined. Cochise proved to be not just a leader, but a master teacher who understood how to introduce overwhelming concepts in manageable portions. Each morning brought new revelations about the advanced knowledge and skills that the Apache community had preserved and developed over generations. Red's first stop was the metalworking workshop, where a man named Delson demonstrated techniques that produced steel stronger and more flexible than anything Red had seen in white settlements. The secret lay not just in the forging process, but in a special mixture of materials that included ground turquoise and other minerals found only in this region. Your people focus on quantity, Delson explained as he shaped a knife blade with tools Red didn't recognize. They want to make many things quickly, cheaply. We focus on creating few things perfectly, tools that will serve many generations. The knife Delson was crafting would have cost a month's wages in any white town, yet here it was being made as a teaching demonstration. The blade held an edge so sharp it could cut paper, yet was flexible enough to bend without breaking. The handle, carved from local hardwood and inlaid with turquoise patterns, was both beautiful and perfectly balanced. "How long does it take to learn these techniques?" Red asked. "For basic skills, perhaps 2 years of dedicated study," Delson replied. "To truly master the art, a lifetime. But you would not need to become a master metalworker yourself. You would need to understand the principles well enough to recognize opportunities in your world." Red was beginning to grasp the scope of what he was being offered. He wouldn't just gain access to Apache knowledge, he would become a bridge between two technological traditions, helping identify ways they could complement each other. The agricultural terraces proved equally impressive. A woman named Ayana's sister, Chenoa, showed Red crop rotation patterns that maintained soil fertility without the need for fertilizers. Plants were arranged in combinations that protected each other from pests and diseases while maximizing the use of available water. "Your farmers fight against the land," Chenoa observed as they walked through gardens that looked more like carefully planned artwork than simple crop fields. "They force it to produce what they want, then wonder why the soil becomes exhausted. We work with the land's natural patterns, encouraging it to give us what we need while maintaining its strength." The vegetable varieties grown in the terraces included many Red had never seen before. Some produced larger yields than their common counterparts. Others were more resistant to drought or disease. All had been selected and improved over countless generations through careful observation and patient breeding. "Could these plants grow in other regions?" Red asked, examining a type of corn that produced ears twice the size of normal varieties. "Some could," Chenoa replied. "Others are specifically adapted to this high desert environment. But the principles behind their development could be applied anywhere. Your people could learn to work with nature rather than against it." The medical knowledge proved most astonishing of all. An elderly medicine man named Nate demonstrated healing techniques that seemed to border on magic. Red watched him treat a child's broken arm using a combination of herbal preparations, precise manipulation of the bones, and what appeared to be some form of energy transfer that required only the touch of hands. "Your doctors focus on fighting disease and injury," Nate explained as the child's arm began healing visibly faster than should have been possible. "They see the body as a machine with broken parts. We see it as part of the larger web of life, connected to forces your medicine men no longer understand." Red had seen plenty of injuries during his years on the trail. Cowboys were always getting hurt in various ways, kicked by horses, gored by cattle, broken bones from falls. The idea that faster, more effective healing was possible fascinated him. "Could you teach me any of these techniques?" "Some," Nate replied carefully. "The herbal knowledge, yes. The physical manipulation, with practice. The energy work." He paused, studying Red intently. "That requires spiritual development that takes many years. But even basic knowledge would make you valuable to people in your world." Red spent hours each day learning about plants that could treat everything from infection to pain to digestive problems. Many grew wild throughout the Southwest, unrecognized and used by white settlers. Others could be cultivated easily if someone understood their requirements. But the most startling revelation came on his 4th day in the valley, when Kachina led him to a workshop he hadn't visited before. Inside, several people were working with materials and tools unlike anything he'd ever seen. What appeared to be ordinary stones were being shaped and polished to create objects that glowed with internal light. "What is this place?" Red asked, staring in amazement at stones that seemed to pulse with captured starlight. "This is where we work with the Earth's hidden energies," Kachina explained. "The same forces that create turquoise and silver also create other things, materials your people would consider impossible." A young man named Manolito demonstrated how certain combinations of minerals could be crafted into objects that provided light without fire, heat without fuel, and tools that could cut through rock like softwood. The science behind these achievements was beyond Red's understanding, but the practical applications were obvious. "How is this possible?" "Your people separate science from spirit," Manolito explained. They study the physical world as if it existed independently of consciousness and intention. We understand that mind and matter work together, that focused intention can influence physical reality in ways your scientists refuse to accept. Red watched in fascination as Manolito shaped a piece of stone using nothing more than focused concentration and occasional touches with specialized tools. The rock gradually transformed into a perfect sphere that glowed softly from within, providing enough light to read by. Could I learn to do this? Perhaps, Manolito replied. You have the kind of mind that might be capable of such work. But, it would require changing your understanding of what is possible. That evening, as Red sat around a fire with Cochise, Ayana, and her daughters, he struggled to process everything he'd seen. The hidden valley contained knowledge that could revolutionize agriculture, medicine, and technology throughout the Southwest. But, it also challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. I don't understand how you've kept all this secret for so long, Red admitted. Knowledge like this could transform the entire region. Knowledge is dangerous, Cochise replied gravely. In the wrong hands, it becomes a weapon. Your people have a history of taking what they want and using it to dominate others. We had to be certain of your character before revealing our most precious secrets. What makes you think I won't misuse what I've learned here? Because, Ayana said gently, you ask that question. Someone who would misuse knowledge doesn't worry about misusing it. Red stared into the fire, weighing the enormous responsibility these people were offering him. What exactly do you want me to do with all this? Start small, Cochise advised. Return to your normal life, but watch for opportunities to help people using what you've learned. A cowboy with unusual healing skills, or knowledge of where to find clean water in drought country, or ability to repair tools in ways that make them last longer. Over time, Kachina added, you could identify other white people who might be trusted with selected knowledge. Doctors who truly care about healing, farmers who respect the land, craftsmen who value quality over quantity. But, always, Nailnish emphasized, with our approval and guidance. This valley's location must remain secret, but its knowledge can gradually spread through trusted channels. Red understood they were proposing a long-term strategy for peaceful cultural exchange. Instead of the violent conflicts that had characterized Apache-white relations, knowledge could become a bridge between two worlds. What about the government? The army? If I start demonstrating unusual capabilities, won't that attract unwanted attention? Possibly, Cochise admitted. Which is why discretion will be essential. You must appear to be simply a skilled cowboy who has picked up useful techniques during his travels. Nothing more dramatic than that. The conversation continued well into the night, covering practical details of how Red might safely apply Apache knowledge in the white world. The more they talked, the more feasible the plan seemed. Red already had a reputation for reliability and competence. Adding unusual skills to his repertoire would enhance that reputation without necessarily raising suspicions about their source. There is one more thing, Ayana said as the fire burned low. If you accept our offer, you become family. Not just metaphorically, but in all practical ways. This valley will always be your home. These people will always support your efforts. You will never again be alone in the world. The emotional impact of those words surprised Red with its intensity. For 15 years, he'd convinced himself that independence was more valuable than belonging. But, sitting here surrounded by people who offered genuine acceptance and shared purpose, he realized how much he'd been missing. What would happen to my horse, my gear, my life outside this valley? Nothing would change immediately, Kachina assured him. You would continue working as a trailhand, but with this place as your true home base. When you needed rest or supplies or simply wanted to be with family, you would return here. The valley would provide resources for your outside work, and your outside work would provide cover for your real mission. Red tried to imagine resuming his normal routine while carrying such momentous secrets. Could he interact with ordinary cowboys and ranchers while possessing knowledge that could change their lives? Could he watch people struggle with problems he knew how to solve, but couldn't reveal the solutions? It won't be easy, Cochise said, reading Red's thoughts. Living between two worlds never is. But, we believe you have the character necessary for such a life. Red stood and walked to the edge of the firelight, staring up at stars that seemed brighter here than anywhere else he'd ever been. Tomorrow, he would have to make the most important decision of his life. Accept the Apache offer, and embrace a destiny he'd never imagined. Decline, and return to his familiar but ultimately empty existence as a wandering cowboy. Can I have until morning to decide? Of course, Ayanna replied. Such a choice should not be made hastily. Red spent most of the night walking through the hidden valley, visiting the workshops and gardens he'd explored during the day. Everything was peaceful under the starlight, but he could sense the vibrant activity that would resume with dawn. This place was alive with purpose and creativity in ways that white settlements seldom achieved. As he passed the medical workshop, Red thought about all the injuries and illnesses he'd seen during his years on the trail. Cowboys who'd died from infections that could have been easily treated with Apache herbal knowledge. Ranchers who'd struggled with poor crops that could have flourished using Apache agricultural techniques. Towns that faced shortages of tools and supplies that could have been solved with Apache crafting skills. The potential for reducing suffering and improving lives was enormous. But, so was the potential for conflict if this knowledge was misused or if its source was discovered prematurely. By dawn, Red had made his decision. As the first light painted the cliff walls gold and rose, he found Cochise, Ayanna, and her daughters waiting for him beside the central fire. I accept your offer, Red announced simply. With full understanding of the responsibilities involved. The smiles that greeted this statement were worth more to Red than any payment he'd ever received. For the first time in his adult life, he belonged somewhere that mattered. Then, let us begin your real education, Cochise said, embracing Red as a son. You have much to learn before you can safely return to your other world. Red McKinnon, trail hand from Missouri, was about to begin his transformation into something the American West had never seen before: a bridge between cultures, a keeper of ancient wisdom, and a guardian of secrets that could change history. His greatest adventure was just beginning. 6 months had passed since Red McKinnon accepted the Apache offer that changed his life forever. Now, as he guided a herd of cattle across the familiar landscape between Tucson and Phoenix, he reflected on how different everything looked through his newly educated eyes. Where other cowboys saw empty desert, Red recognized dozens of medicinal plants, water indicators, and natural resources that could support human life if properly understood. The transformation hadn't been easy. Spending 3 weeks in intensive training with Cochise and his teachers had challenged every assumption Red held about the world. Learning to work with natural forces rather than against them required a complete shift in thinking that left him mentally exhausted but spiritually energized. The most difficult part had been learning to live with secrets. Every day brought opportunities to help people using Apache knowledge, but revealing too much too quickly would endanger the hidden valley and its inhabitants. Red had to develop the patience to introduce innovations gradually, letting others believe they were his own discoveries or techniques learned from unnamed sources. His first test came during a cattle drive from the Broken Wool Ranch to markets in New Mexico. One of the young cowboys, barely 18 years old, suffered a severe infection after cutting his hand on barbed wire. The ranch foreman was preparing to send the boy back to town for medical treatment that might cost him his job. Red quietly treated the wound with a poultice made from plants he'd gathered along the trail, telling the others he'd learned the technique from an old Mexican vaquero. Within 2 days, the infection was gone and the cut was healing perfectly. The boy kept his job, and Red gained a reputation for having unusual knowledge of folk remedies. Word of Red's healing skills spread through the cowboy community faster than prairie fire. Ranch owners began specifically requesting him for long drives, knowing that someone with medical knowledge could prevent minor injuries from becoming major problems. Red found himself in greater demand than ever, which provided perfect cover for his real activities. Between jobs, Red would disappear into the mountains for what others assumed were hunting or prospecting trips. In reality, he was returning to the hidden valley to report on his experiences and receive additional training. Each visit brought new knowledge and deeper understanding of his role as a cultural bridge. Cochise had been right about the gradual approach. By introducing Apache techniques slowly and claiming diverse sources for his knowledge, Red avoided suspicion while building credibility. Ranchers accepted his agricultural advice because it produced better results. Cowboys trusted his medical treatments because they worked faster and more effectively than traditional remedies. The real breakthrough came when Red encountered Dr. Samuel Morrison, a frontier physician struggling to treat patients with limited supplies and outdated techniques. Red carefully shared selected Apache herbal knowledge, presenting it as folk remedies he'd collected during his travels. Dr. Morrison, desperate for anything that might help his patients, was willing to experiment with unconventional treatments. The results were remarkable. Infections that previously required amputation healed completely with Apache poultices. Digestive problems that had plagued patients for months disappeared after treatment with specific plant combinations. Pain management improved dramatically with techniques that Dr. Morrison had never seen before. Where did you learn all this? Dr. Morrison asked after watching Red demonstrate a particularly effective treatment for broken bones. Picked it up here and there, Red replied casually. Mexican healers, Indian traders, old-timers who remembered techniques from earlier days. You hear a lot of stories when you spend your life on the trail. Dr. Morrison accepted this explanation because it fit his preconceptions about frontier knowledge. He began documenting Red's techniques and sharing them with other physicians, always crediting them to traditional frontier remedies rather than any specific source. The knowledge spread through legitimate medical channels without revealing its Apache origins. Similar success came in agriculture. Red's advice helped struggling farmers increase their yields and improve soil quality. His suggestions for crop rotation and companion planting appeared to be innovations based on careful observation and experimentation. Ranchers who followed his guidance found their pastures more productive and their cattle healthier. But Red's most significant achievement came through his growing network of trusted contacts. Over the months, he'd identified several white settlers who demonstrated the character and wisdom necessary to handle greater responsibilities. These included Dr. Morrison, a teacher named Sarah Williams who worked with Apache children at the reservation school, and a rancher named Jack Sullivan who'd always treated Indian workers fairly. Red began introducing these carefully selected individuals to each other, creating informal connections between people who shared similar values. He never revealed the full scope of his knowledge or the existence of the hidden valley, but he provided enough information to help them recognize each other as allies in building better relationships between cultures. The strategy was working exactly as Cochise had predicted. Knowledge was spreading through trusted channels while suspicions remained low. Red's reputation grew steadily, but as an unusually skilled cowboy rather than someone with access to revolutionary information. The most challenging moment came when Red encountered Captain James Harrison, a U.S. Army officer investigating reports of unusual Indian activity in the mountains. Harrison had heard stories about a cowboy with remarkable healing skills and wanted to question Red about his sources. "I understand you've picked up some interesting techniques during your travels," Harrison said during a carefully casual conversation at a tavern in Tombstone. "The Army is always interested in improving medical care for our troops in remote areas." Red recognized the probe for what it was and responded carefully. "Just folk remedies, Captain. Things you pick up from various people over the years. Nothing that would interest the Army, I'm sure. Still, I'd like to hear about some of these techniques. Purely for medical purposes, you understand." Red shared a few basic herbal treatments, common knowledge that could be found in any frontier almanac. He described them as things he'd learned from an old Mexican woman and a retired Army medic, creating false trails that led nowhere. Captain Harrison left the conversation convinced that Red's reputation was exaggerated and his knowledge conventional. But the encounter reminded Red of the constant danger inherent in his mission. Government officials, military leaders, and opportunists were always looking for advantages they could exploit. The Apache knowledge he carried could be used to dominate rather than heal if it fell into the wrong hands. This concern led to Red's most important innovation, the creation of what he privately called the network. Working through his carefully cultivated contacts, Red began identifying and connecting people throughout the Southwest who shared values of fairness, compassion, and respect for different cultures. Dr. Morrison introduced him to other physicians who were frustrated with conventional medicine's limitations. Sarah Williams connected him with teachers and missionaries who truly cared about Apache welfare rather than simply converting them to white ways. Jack Sullivan provided access to ranchers and business owners who understood that long-term prosperity required cooperation rather than exploitation. Gradually, without any of them fully understanding the scope of what was happening, these individuals began forming a loose alliance of people committed to peaceful progress. They shared information, supported each other's efforts, and worked together on projects that benefited both white and Apache communities. Red's role as coordinator remained hidden, but his influence grew steadily. When disputes arose between ranchers and Apache bands, Red could often facilitate communication through his network contacts. When Apache families needed medical treatment that reservation doctors couldn't provide, Dr. Morrison and his colleagues would quietly offer help. When Apache children showed unusual academic ability, Sarah Williams would connect them with educational opportunities. The Hidden Valley remained completely secret, but its influence was spreading throughout the region in ways that no one outside the Apache community could trace. Red had become exactly what Cochise envisioned, a bridge between worlds that allowed beneficial exchange without cultural destruction. The transformation in Red's personal life was equally dramatic. For the first time since leaving his family's farm in Missouri, he had a real home and people who truly cared about his welfare. Visits to the Hidden Valley provided spiritual renewal and emotional support that sustained him through the challenges of his double life. Ayana and her daughters had become like family to him, offering wisdom, companionship, and understanding that he'd never found in the white world. Cochise served as both mentor and father figure, guiding Red's development with patience and insight that helped him navigate increasingly complex situations. But, perhaps most importantly, Red had found purpose that went beyond simple survival or personal advancement. His work was contributing to something larger than himself, a gradual healing of the wounds between two cultures that had been shaped by decades of misunderstanding and conflict. As Red guided the cattle herd across a particularly beautiful stretch of desert, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, he reflected on how completely his life had changed. The restless wandering that had characterized his first 15 years in the West had been replaced by focused mission and genuine belonging. He was still Thomas Red McKinnon, skilled cowboy and reliable trailhand. But he was also much more keeper of ancient wisdom, facilitator of cultural exchange, and guardian of secrets that could reshape the future of the American Southwest. The debt that 3 desperate Apache women thought they owed him had transformed into the greatest gift he'd ever received. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. Government pressure on Apache communities was increasing, and Red's network of allies would be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, under stars that had witnessed countless generations of human struggle and triumph, Red McKinnon knew he was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The 3 Apache women had indeed come to claim him, but what they'd claimed was not payment for an old debt. They'd claimed his destiny, revealing to him the man he was always meant to become. In saving their lives 10 years ago, Red had unknowingly saved his own soul. Now, through his work as a bridge between worlds, he was helping to save the future itself. As the campfire crackled and his fellow cowboys settled in for the night, Red smiled at the irony of his situation. To everyone around him, he was simply a skilled hand who'd gotten lucky with his career. They had no idea they were sharing their evening meal with a man who carried the power to change history in his weathered saddlebags and carefully guarded memories. But that was exactly how it should be. The best bridges were invisible to those who crossed them, allowing passage between worlds without drawing attention to the engineering that made such passage possible. Red McKinnon had become a master bridge builder, and his greatest constructions were just beginning to bear traffic between the future he was helping to create and the past he was helping to honor. The adventure that had begun with 3 desperate women beside a dried-up spring was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Red had learned that sometimes the most important debts were the ones you never knew you owed, and the most valuable payments were the ones that seemed like gifts. As he settled into his bedroll under the vast western sky, Red McKinnon looked forward to whatever tomorrow might bring, confident that his life had meaning and purpose beyond anything he'd ever dared to imagine.